Brilliant. Okay, I'm here with Colin Parsons, author of The Gamer. Can you tell us what The Gamer is about?
I certainly can. I've actually got one copy right here. The Gamer is my first publishing with Crystal Peake. It's all about a 12-year-old boy called Drake Banks. He's been moving from army base to army base with his parents. His father was a captain in the army. Unfortunately, his father died, and so they had to move off the army sites, and they had to move back to Drake's mother's town. And Drake has been used to moving around various parts of the UK and over the different parts of the world, and all of a sudden he's put in one place where he can't go anywhere. He doesn't get on in school. He doesn't get on with the other pupils. He finds it difficult to make friends. And so the only kind of friend he's got is where he's living now. There's a huge complex with 10-pin bowling and a brand new gaming arcade. You know, the kind of places that have got a big cinema, that kind of a complex. But he doesn't want to go there because all the popular kids go there. So in the old part of the town, there's an old beaten up rundown arcade with old gaming consoles in there. And he loves going there and playing on them. And there's one particular console called Death Trap. And he loves that because he can play for hours and it doesn't cost him much. So it takes me back to when I used to play Pac-Man, that kind of thing. Well, he's playing on Death Trap. But what happens is the game actually sucks him in. And he finds himself falling into the adventure, into the platforms of the games. He finds himself underwater. He's got to get to the surface. And he's in like a wetsuit with a watch with a timer on with an hour. And he realizes that he's counting down and he's got to get out of this game before the timer runs out. Otherwise, he's going to be locked in there forever. Now, there are two opponents competition in this game, which calls Scott Vent and Crystal Moon, but they are computer programs. So he's got to compete against them to try and get out of this game. I mean, they're programs, so they should win. But he's got the human element. He can think of things that they wouldn't because he's human. And so the game starts from there, and there's all kinds of different platforms. There's robots they got to get past. There's they got to fly in rockets. They've got to get through there's electronic spiders. There is tons of stuff going on because I like to write with fast-paced action and twists and turns. And that's why I wrote this book called The Gamer. So that's what it's basically all about. You've got to get into it and get into his head to see if he can get out of this game. He even kind of, there's one part where he may merge with the two competitors, but you'd have to read the book to find out what happens there.
Brilliant. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Okay, so why did you choose to have the tragedy of Drake's father's death and the military setting in the story?
Because I've never done something like that before. I've got a back catalogue of about 14 books behind me, and I want to try something a little bit different. And if you've got a little bit of tragedy in there, as well as all the action, then it gives a different twist to the story, and you can empathize with him, especially now with everything that's gone on in the last year or so. And I thought to myself, if you've got his father in the army and there's something has happened, his father has died, and then he's been used to a certain life, and now he's got a completely different life, and he's got to adapt to that. And I thought that brought up different challenges. It's funny, when you're writing something, you don't know what's going to turn up, and you don't know what the characters are going to be like. And all of a sudden, I had all these different directions I could go, and it was more exciting. So being a writer, and been writing for 20 odd years now, and it threw up things I'd never come across before, and it was quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, that is interesting. So did you research the life of military children before you started writing?
No, I didn't. I should have, I suppose. No, I didn't. I kind of, in my head, I had like old war movies where they got these barracks with the army and World War II and things. So, and I've seen a couple of films with families that travel around, and that kind of thing appealed to me. Like I said, I've always written sci-fi and fantasy and that kind of thing, and this is fantasy because it's obviously a video game and a bit of sci-fi in there, but there's a human element to it as well, and that you could dig deeper into the character of Drake Banks and see through his eyes and the hurt that he's carrying with him, because I had a review of it recently, and I got picked up on the fact that he's telling himself to man up, because these days with mental health and things, you can get help and support with that. But he kind of feels like he's the man of the family now. I mean, it's a different world now, and there is no man of the family. Anybody can take the lead there because of the stuff that's going on. But he feels like he's got to look after his mother. And he's got to take over the mantle of what his father was, and I just that was nice to dig into. Then it was really enjoyable to write.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. How did you decide on the appearance of the video game world?
Like I said, the Pac-Man thing with the platform games from the 80s, that sprung to mind first because I like Tron. And Tron Legacy, the movies. I'm not a big gaming buff. I'm not into these, I don't know, Call of Duties and all these different stuff that's coming out, because I think there's a video game coming out every other week now. But it just took me back to the beginning when Space Invaders came out and Pac-Man and all that kind of thing. And so I like adventure. I like writing about different situations, and with a video game, you've got the different platforms that you could have deadly spikes, you could have water involved, you could be chased by robots, and the adventure is endless. You can add more and more and more, because if you're playing a video game, there can be 40 different levels. And I kind of, like I said, I was kind of digging in the dark, really, but because I like writing adventures and I like watching a lot of films with different angles to it, I put that into the gaming part of it, if you know what I mean. I like to watch sci-fi, so I watch a lot of Star Trek and Star Wars and that kind of thing. And I kind of used that rather than the experience of gaming. And like I said, it threw up a lot of different stuff. And I like chases and I like dark streets, so I put all that kind of stuff in there as well.
Brilliant. Okay. You also teach creative writing in schools. So what techniques do you use when teaching creative writing?
Well, that's kind of apt for this interview, to be honest, because this is a World Book Day interview. And the last school I did was on World Book Day in 2020, before the pandemic hit. So I've been out of work now for a year because an agency books me into schools, and I do about between 35 and 40 schools a year up and down the UK. And what I tend to do is I do a little bit of a presentation first, and then I try and get the pupils to use their 5 senses, because everything you do in writing involves, like, you smell, you taste, you hear, your eyes, and touching. And I try and get them to do a little exercise to get them to get that into their stories, and how to get a story up and running, how to get characters. And the funniest thing for me is, because I've talked to lots of teachers over the years, and they said the hardest thing for them is getting pupils to come up with characters' names. So I've got a way of doing that. What I normally do is I've got a sponge ball, and I'll throw it at the class, and whoever catches it, a boy or a girl, I'll say to them, okay, pretend you're in a garage, maybe in a garage that is fitting tires or something. And they say, okay, yeah. Well, in the back of the garage, there's a toolbox, right? So what would you find in a toolbox? And they might say, oh, wrench or screwdriver or something like that. So I'll use that maybe as a surname. We've ended up with lots of different, what have we ended up with? Because I've taken them to the beach and said, what do you find on the beach? Or shells. Or you could have something like, I don't know, shell spanner. Shell spanner could be a character's name. Well, they think, oh, wow, that's different. The teachers like that idea, and they've already got a character then. They've got the name. I give them an adventure, the outline of the adventure, and then they've got to use their 5 senses, and they've got a character, and they've got to delve into the story. I help them along then while we're doing the workshop. They'll say, look, I'm stuck. I'm walking down a corridor. I don't know how to get out. Well, I'll say, okay, if you're in a corridor, maybe there's a trap door. If there's, we always end up using zombies for some reason, but I say, what if you're cornered and there's a zombie chasing you? Maybe you're at the end of a corridor. How would you get out of it? It's an inescapable situation that you manage to get out of. Well, he said, I don't know. I'm up against a wall and the zombies coming towards me. Well, I said, think, you could have a trap door, which is there could be like a silver ring in the dust, and you pull it up and there's a trap door. You could look above you, and there could be maybe a rope dangling down, or the end of a ladder with the rungs that could get out that way. Pressed against the wall, you could touch one of the bricks that could push into the wall like a button, and maybe a panel opens up behind you. Oh, wow, okay. And that's what gets it up and running. And it doesn't matter, the scope of the story can be anything you want. So they haven't got no boundaries. They can dive into the story and they can get lost in it. And because it's fantasy and it's sci-fi and supernatural, they can throw anything in there. They can have lava as the floor. There was one little girl, she didn't know how to get the story up and running and exciting. And I said, well, what do you do in the evening? Or she says, I go to dance practice. Okay. I said, where do you go? Do you go to a studio? Or no, we use a school gym. So I said, in the school gym, have they got climbing bars? And she said, yes. I said, have they got like, little things you can climb on, climbing frames? And she said, yeah. Well, I said, pretend that the school gym has got all the equipment out, but the floor is lava. You can't touch the floor, otherwise you'll be scorched and singed to within an inch of your life. So she said, I could jump onto the bars, I could swing across, we could climb over on like a bridge or something. And she couldn't believe it. She had a story to dive into then. So there you go.
That's fantastic. Now is a great time to talk about how brilliant your YouTube channel is, because it is brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a teacher, and I actually do show my students some of your videos in class.
Oh, brilliant. I've been running that for quite a while now. It's kind of slowed down a little bit because I've recently put a couple of podcasts on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Explaining Wizard's Kingdom, a series I did my first book when I first started out. And because there's a lot of celebrities and stuff now, people doing podcasts. So instead of me doing live video, I've just got a picture with recording my voice behind it. And I've tried that because I like to try a little bit of everything. Because as you know, if you've obviously been on my YouTube channel, I've got about over 100 videos on there.
Yeah.
Ranging from poetry, comedy poetry, to reading out stories, to helping children to get stories up and running, and how to describe and all that kind of stuff. So that's a mind of information on that channel, which I've put there, which I think is really good. I just need a few more followers.
Yeah.
I want to get up in the 1 million followers bracket, which will take about 20 years. But I don't know, with YouTube, it's kind of, there's too much going on at the moment, and there's too much variety, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it takes quite a while to go on YouTube. Going back to teaching, do you think that spending time with your audience helps inspire your writing?
It definitely inspires my writing, because they come up with stuff that I wouldn't think of. It's because I work with what do I work with? ages 8 to 11, maybe 12 and 13 sometimes in secondary school. So they will, because children use the internet a lot with video gaming and storyboarding and that kind of thing, they come up with stuff that surprises me, and I think, wow, I'd never have thought of that. And that then might set something off in my mind for me to start writing a short story or writing a novel or something. Short stories, I love writing even now, because I started off writing short stories, then I went on to writing books. But children have got a wild imagination, and they can, we had to go out, when I was a kid, we had to go out and find adventure. We could go up the mountain, we could go, where I live in a place called the Rhondda Valley in South Wales, there wasn't a lot going on when I was a kid. I had to find my own adventure. Now, it's at the touch of a button, you've got a world on the internet, and you've got all these different platforms you can go on. So I think I don't think it's fantastic that they spend hours and hours and hours on video games, but if they spend a little bit of time playing videos, a little bit of time reading and watching films and stuff as well, the video games are so graphic now that when they first came out, they were really kind of one-dimensional. Now the grass looks like grass. The rivers that flow by, they look and sound like a river. So they can go into the video game and they can experience it, and that can reflect in their writing. And then when they come up with something in the plot, I think, wow, that inspires me to carry on to write my own stuff as well. So, because authors are always looking out for ideas, looking out for the next best thing to write about. And if something pops up like that from one of the pupils, which has been a long time ago, a year now, so I've had to try and think of my own stuff. But yeah, and I found that a lot of authors since lockdown, the ideas have been slipping away, and they haven't been writing so much because they haven't experienced the outdoors. So it's muted their inspiration and their ideas. So I can't wait to get back out there and get my ideas sort of flaring up again. So I've been writing stuff, but I did kind of slow down. But answer to your question, I do learn off the children as much as they learn off me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I have heard before of authors going into schools and that sparking ideas. I believe the book Howl's Moving Castle, which I know because of the film. Apparently, a student just asked the author, I think her name was Diane Wynne Jones, just asked her, "You should write a book called The Moving Castle," and she did.
Well, my granddaughter, she inspires me a lot, because she'd be 5 a week Sunday. In fact, I actually wrote a book called Amaya's Imagination, Traffic Cone Trouble, where she turns into a traffic cone. And the other day, she was looking for something. She'd lost a toy. And because we were in a bubble with my son and my daughter-in-law, we were looking after her. And she'd lost something, so she couldn't find it in the living room. So she grabbed a bit of paper and a pen. And I said to her, what are you doing then? Her name's Amaya. Or she said, I'm drawing the living room so I can find what I've lost. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you could draw a map and you could find anything you want to look for?
That'd be brilliant.
I would never have thought of that. So little things like that, actually, she gives me lots of ideas as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, children's imaginations are so much more active, aren't they?
There's no boundaries, that they can think of what they want to think about. That's what's great about being a kid.
Yeah. Sort of leads us on to the next question. What are you writing at the moment?
Like I said, since lockdown, in the beginning of lockdown, I literally wrote 3 books. But
wow.
I've got behind me, you can see I've got a lot of pictures of all my children's books, and I've got the picture book. But I've actually written and had traditional book contracts for an adult crime fiction, but fantasy I've written a series called Killian Spooks Mysteries, which is about a wizard detective. And so I've Pegasus Elliott Mackenzie, my publisher, they actually, I wrote three series of these novels, and they've signed me up for all three. So the first one should be coming out sometime this year, which is about a detective who's the police have got crimes they can't solve in the town of Windyvale, which I've made up, and the police chief noticed that there was an advert in the paper with a wizard detective, and he said, look, if you can solve these crimes, I'll give you more crimes to solve, and then we'll put you on the payroll. So there's strange things happening in Windyvale, and this wizard detective is helping them out with the supernatural cases. So a friend of mine read a book that I wrote a while ago. This is blatantly plugging my work, a book called Ghosted. Which is based in my local area, and the protagonist in there is Killian Spooks. And my friend said to me, look, I'm a big Jim Butcher fan, The Dresden Files, which is a detective in America who's a wizard. Why don't you write a series of like British wizard detective? And he said Killian Spooks would be amazing. So that's what I did. And I've written Killian Spooks Mysteries. Spirit Jumper is the first one. The second one is Phantom Thief, and the third one is Strange Happenings. I've signed all them up, and the fourth one is called, do you know, I can't think what the fourth one is called at the moment. Night Strike, and I've almost finished that one. So I've got those four. I'm hoping to write 8 books in that series. But I've also, for children, I'm in the middle of writing something called The Lost Airship, which I started writing about 2 weeks ago. I'm only about 4 chapters in, and it's about 4 children. As far as I've got, I've only into 4 chapters. They're in a plane crash and land on an island, but they find an airship that they learn is in this cave, and they learn to fly it away from the island. And on the island is some strange creatures, but they land on another island, which is like Jurassic Park. And it's full of dinosaurs and stuff there. So there's lots of different things going on. But it's an airship from like the 30s and 40s. And it's kind of retro, kind of like steampunk. Yeah. But these 4 children are gifted. They've gone on a gifted, a G&T program, Gifted and Talented. But the plane have crashed, and they've got to learn to survive, and they've got to fly this airship. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, that sounds fantastic.
Well, I was inspired by a series of books quite a few years ago by a Canadian author called Kenneth Oppel. Kenneth Oppel did a series called Airborne, Skybreaker and Star Climber. They've sold worldwide in 20 countries or whatever. They've had awards, and that's about an airship. And I thought, well, I want to write something of my own. And so I've got this one, which I'm in the middle of. And there's a couple of stories that I've written in the background I haven't quite finished. One was called Winter Code, which that I'm going to eventually finish. And there's 1 or 2 others, which if I look in my files, because I've always got something on the go. If I run out of ideas, that's when I know that I've come to the end of the road. So I'm always happy when ideas pop into my head.
Brilliant.
Well, first of all, hi Charlotte, how are you?
Hi Colin, yeah, not too bad, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, fine. This is obviously for World Book Day. So I'm talking to Charlotte Byrne, is it?
It is Byrne, yeah.
Yeah. You've written a book called Forked Up?
I have indeed, this book here.
Oh, wow, yeah, I've seen that on the Crystal Peak website. And you've also done quite a few short stories, I'm told.
A number of short stories, yeah. So a couple of horror stories and just some basic working class fiction in various anthologies by a number of publishers, but it's all up on Twitter and things like that.
How did you get the writing bug in the first place?
It's going to sound really, really awkward, but it is one of those moments when you know when you hear authors say, "Oh, yeah, I've always written." It really was that case for me. So sort of silly little things during school, and then when I was doing my undergraduate studies, I sort of put it away for a while, until I had the chance to write a short story as part of my course. So I wrote a short story in Spanish, which we then had to translate back into English. And that actually ended up being my very first publication.
Wow.
Kind of, shocked me as well. But yeah, that was kind of like, that was the moment when I realised actually I could sort of go further with this and sort of have a proper go at it.
Okay, so I mean, you've got to enjoy what you're doing, otherwise you wouldn't do it, would you? You've written this book called Forked Up, which you've had. Is this the first book that you've had published?
It is, yeah. It's my debut novel, very first sort of foray into longer fiction, shall we say. Always had like some seeds of ideas just sort of spinning around, but this is the first one I actually stuck with and sort of saw through to the end.
How excited was it to get it actually published?
It was super exciting. I mean, I tried to place it for a little while, but Peake were the guys that really were all for it and sort of gave it that little push. It was a very humbling experience for me as well.
The most exciting thing for me even now is opening up a box and seeing the brand new book in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even after, I mean, I've got a back catalogue of about 15 books, but it's still just as exciting.
100%. Yeah, I mean, when the postwoman came with that big old box, I was just like,
But I'm going to ask you a little bit about Forked Up. One thing I'm totally intrigued with, and I don't know where you got it from, but Jack in the Green Inn?
The Jack in the Green Inn, yeah. So that's where the story kind of starts. The musicians are obviously on their little May Day tour of around southeast of England, where I'm from. And Jack in the Green Inn was just kind of, I mean, I'm sure there must be Jack in the Green Inn somewhere in England. You can just imagine the sign, can't you? But
you didn't actually, it's not an actual inn, it's something you made up, is it? Or?
It kind of is, yes. Yeah. So vaguely inspired by a number of pubs that I've visited in here in Kent. Not saying I'm or anything, but far from it. But I do like the architecture and things like that.
So what actually happens in Forked Up then? What's the premise of the story?
So in Forked Up, obviously, as I said, that it's these two young musicians on their little tour around Kent for the May Day bank holiday, and they find a very interesting book in this pub that they stop in.
Yeah. And
they realise it's a book of folk songs, which is kind of the stuff that they're into. But it turns out, being a fantasy story, this book is cursed. And when you read from it or sing from it, as they do, they end up kind of in this parallel world of old England, which is inspired by folklore, British folklore, populated by all sorts of colourful characters, which readers will meet. And yeah, it's basically a race against time. One of them has to save the other from being killed ritualistically.
So are you a big kind of film buff then, or are you big into reading?
Bit of both, to be honest with you. To be honest with you, Forked Up actually did begin life as a screenplay.
Okay.
My original intention was just to start writing it as a screenplay, and then I realised that actually it would work better as a novel. So
yeah,
that's what ended up happening.
I just love the idea of a magical book that sets everything off. And so, is there a dark character in there?
There are two dark characters. So we have Lord Donald, who is wanting to resurrect his dead wife, which is why he has one of the musicians prisoner and needs her blood for this ritual. But the real evil guy is a sorcerer called Thackeray, who's kind of his advisor. And let's just say, yeah, there's a little bit of power play going on.
So Thackeray is a sorcerer or a wizard. So is Thackeray the traditional style wizard with the long drapes and the pointed hat and the wand, or is it a little bit different to that?
It kind of, yeah. I mean, the whole book basically kind of likes to poke fun at the traditional fantasy genre. So fantasy fans are going to sort of recognise different things that I reference. But Thackeray himself is just a really creepy old man. That's the way I would describe him.
Do you, as a writer, then published author now as well, do you enjoy writing novels more than short stories, or is there a fine balance there? Or
I do think that both formats kind of inform one another. I've learned things writing short stories that I've eventually fed into my longer fiction, and vice versa. I enjoy both equally, but I do like getting really involved on a novel because it's you can just lose yourself in it in a way that I don't think you can in a short story. I mean, maybe it's
How long would you say a short story is on average that you write?
how long's a piece of string? I do like flash fiction, but sort of I like to go sort of for the 10,000 mark because you can just get a little bit longer with it. And
Do you find it difficult to move from, like, if you've just written a short story and then go into a novel? Because I find that obviously if I wrote a short story with, say, 15,000 words,
Mhm.
you've got a certain end to it that you've got to tie everything up. But then when the other discipline then of getting into doing a novel, which could be anything up to 80, 100,000 words or whatever, you've got the other discipline of trying to stretch it all out as well. I don't know, that's what I find when I'm doing it. Do you find the same thing? Or
kind of, yeah. I mean, the one thing with novels is sometimes I don't always know how they're going to end.
yeah.
But I mean, the characters do like to go off and do their own things sometimes. Much as you would like to have everything planned out, it's doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, no, I do understand what you're saying. There are sort of two different processes, but in the end, it's down to the each to their own, isn't it?
Down to the individual author, I suppose. So these might be cliche questions I'm asking, but where do you get your ideas from then?
Yeah, good question. So Folked Up just kind of, it was really inspired by my love of folk music,
Right.
and just kind of wanting to share this thing that I was really excited about with people that may not have an understanding of it. I do think it's quite an accessible introduction to the world of folklore.
Yeah.
I can get an idea from anywhere really, just even if I hear something on the train or sort of back in the days when we were allowed to go out and about, random conversations from people I might think actually that'd be quite good stuff.
If you're a fan of folk music, do you actually play instruments yourself?
Alas, no. I wouldn't even dare. Wouldn't even know where to start picking things up. But I did speak to a number of musicians who helped me with some of the more musical stuff.
I've got a couple of author friends who play the banjo. They may be in their own little band that plays in pubs and different things when they're open. But the idea of like a music venue, that's never crossed my mind, to be honest. So because do you go to like folk festivals and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, back when we were allowed out, I used to like going to sort of, I mean, where I'm from, Medway has a really vibrant music scene. There's always like lots of little venues and local bands playing, and I do like to go to them when I can, really.
When you were in school, either juniors or secondary, were you the pupil who was locked when everybody was outside playing? Were you the one jotting stuff down in the classroom?
Well, I always had a pen in my hands, whether that was drawing or writing things down. I'm very much an indoors girl anyway, so I'd much rather in reading a book or sort of doing something creative rather than just sort of running around riots.
So with lockdown, and it's kind of I know it's a global pandemic, and it's devastating, and it's devastated the world. But because you've been locked in, it hasn't changed your life much then, to be confined to the house.
To be honest, no. I mean, obviously I'm a PhD student, so I can do most of my work indoors anyway.
Yeah.
The only thing that's really changed for me is not being able to go to work. And I'm not going to lie, I've been loving furlough. I know I'm very fortunate to be in the position where that's happening for me. So I mean, it's obviously it's a horrible thing that's happened, but you have to make the best of that situation.
It's like I said, it's been horrible for everybody, and it looks like it might be light at the end of the tunnel now. We don't know, but I'm hoping to get back out in the fresh air and start walking and things again. So the age-old question: what are you working on at the moment? Have you got a novel on the go, or a short story, or?
Yeah, I have a couple of novels on the go actually. So the main one that I'm focusing on at the moment is for my PhD project, which is set in the Spanish Civil War and just afterwards. And there's another novel that I'm working on as well about a bunch of highwaymen. in the 1700s, and this particular story is about a young highway woman who falls in love with one of her victims, or would-be victims. So
this all kind of ties in with the folk music thing as well, doesn't it? I suppose I don't know. I mean, I've never written anything like that, but thinking of like highwaymen, you don't think of highway women, do you? So that's a nice little twist to the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of inspired by The Wicked Lady, which is one of my favourite films of all time. And
The Wicked Lady, okay.
Yeah, it's a classic, but I just thought it'd be quite good if you could put it in a YA context and sort of have this highway woman in training almost. So she's learning things on the job, like her family are all sort of rogues and things like that. So quite exciting.
So how gritty is it? Is she a nasty piece of work, or is it a kind of a humorous? Do you know, as a highway person, because you get these old films where they're it's not how would I say, a ruthless kind of the films and books that I've read with highwaymen in them are just somebody's pinched a bag of gold and run off with it. But is there a sinister element to your story then, or?
There will be a sinister element. There's a particularly nasty character who's related to the main character. He hasn't quite turned up yet, but I'm sort of planning to as I go. Yeah. A long lost uncle who's very nasty piece of work and is after sort of taking over the band that they belong to.
But it's set for YA, you said, is it?
It is YA, yeah. So we're not going to get too dark with it, I don't think.
Well, I always get a little bit, even though I've been writing for a while, a bit mixed up because you've got all these different terms. You go YA, and you've got new adult. Have you heard of that one? So what would you say is the age boundary of a YA book? What does it go up to?
I mean, I think anyone can read a YA book, to be honest with you. I mean, I know plenty of people.
12 to 16 kind of thing, is it? Or
for me, I would say sort of more 14 onwards.
Right, okay.
In my opinion, but obviously there's nothing to stop a younger person from reading it because goodness knows I was reading some dodgy stuff when I was young.
I have got in front of me, or I will have eventually. Can you see me, Rosa?
Yes, I can see you.
Ah, here we are. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. I've got a kind of off-the-cuff question for you to start with.
Okay.
Because you've just done a debut novel, but before we get into that, I've got two names on. I've got a little pad here, and I've got Rosa Carr, and I've got Carolina De Vivo.
Yes, that's me. Both of them are me. I decided to write under a pen name.
So which one is you've written under Rosa Carr, which is a pen name?
Yes.
So your name is Carolina De Vivo?
Yes, Carolina De Vivo.
So my first question, to be honest, is that's a beautiful name. Why didn't you use that as your author name then?
Yeah, so when I originally started writing, I was still at university, and I had plans to eventually pursue a career in psychology, whether it be as a therapist or in the academic world.
Right.
And either way, I would need to use my name professionally. So I had made the decision then to write under a pen name.
Okay. Where did you actually get Rosa Carr from then?
Okay, so Rosa is actually my middle name, so it really is my name. And then Carr is just short for my first name, Carolina.
Oh, very clever. I mean, I've just written an adult crime fiction series. My name is Colin R. Parsons, children's author, but for my adult series, I'm called Jake Ridge.
Okay.
So I've kind of because I didn't want the children reading my adult stuff.
That's fair enough.
So you've got a debut novel, which is very exciting. It's always exciting to have a new book out. Is it actually published and out by Crystal Peake now, or is it due out?
Yes, it's out on Kindle at the moment. The paperback is due next month.
So could you tell me a little bit about you first, where you're from and how you got into writing?
I'm originally from South Africa. I grew up there until I was about 21.
Yeah.
And then I moved to the UK. I'm based outside of London,
Right.
in the southeast. So I have been here for a few years, and I started writing in my second year of university,
Okay.
back when I was still in South Africa. And then it did take a few years to finally formulate the full story. And then it was only once I was here that I
Yeah.
finally finished the story completely.
How did you first acclimatise to the UK then? Because I'm assuming that South Africa is very hot
Yes.
and South London is very cold.
Yes. The weather is one thing that I do miss from South Africa. And I do miss the summers when we
Yeah.
have so little of it here in the UK. But otherwise, I've acclimatized quite well. Putting aside the weather, everything else has been great.
So if you had a winter in South Africa, what kind of temperatures are you talking?
Probably springtime here.
Oh wow.
So the nights get quite cold
Yeah.
there, but during the day it can be quite warm with the sun shining.
Oh, okay. So what I'm going to ask you next is, should I call you Rosa or should I call you Carolina?
Either way, Rosa for the book purposes.
Okay, then Rosa. This Air Fay is the name of this book, which when Crystal Peake started advertising it, I thought, what a really unusual title. It's unlike any title I've come across, because you get run-of-the-mill titles for different novels, but Air Fay really stood out.
I'm
So
glad to hear that.
could you tell me a little bit about the story then?
So the book is about fairies, so the Fay part of the title. It's about a girl who wakes up and she doesn't know what's happened to her, and she discovers that she is actually a fairy with wings and everything.
Well, my granddaughter, who's 5 in a week Sunday, she's into Tinkerbell. So I've just had a full series on Disney Plus of Tinkerbell. And so I'm kind of into fairies at the moment.
Great.
So she wakes up one day and she's a fairy.
Yes.
So what kind of powers and stuff does she have? No, how was her life changed then?
So she doesn't actually remember her life as a human. So the whole part of the book is discovering or recovering her memories and learning to adapt to the new world that she finds herself in.
So what kind of abilities have she got as a fairy? What can she do?
Initially nothing, because she doesn't think that she's got these powers. And
Yeah.
then she slowly does discover that she has powers, and I won't tell you what they are because
Okay,
that's a spoiler.
That's fair enough. Okay. So what gave you the idea for this story initially then?
So I've used to be very fascinated with fairies, and when I was younger I had a whole lot of little ornaments of fairies.
Yeah.
And I found a book to learn how to draw fairies and the fairy world.
Sketching kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then whilst I was, practicing my drawing, I just had a thought of what would it be like to wake up as a fairy.
Yeah.
And then I just wrote it. I just started writing one day, and
Like an epiphany then.
yes.
So because I don't know why, but at the moment, I don't know if it's just because of my granddaughter, but everything seems to be fairies. Because if we go for a walk when we're allowed, there's fairy gardens that pop up in different places. We've got when my granddaughter comes over, we got a fairy garden at the bottom of the garden with the doors, and that seems to be a big theme at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think they go in in waves and stages. So I remember when I was a teenager, late teens, vampires were all the trend.
Yeah.
And then it moved into werewolves, and then we had a bit of zombies there for a while.
Yeah. Well, you had the Twilight thing.
Yeah.
And you had the Walking Dead.
Exactly.
So what's the target age for Air Fay then?
She's a late teenager, 18 or 19 years old. She's just finished university, but the actual book itself, I'd say, could be anywhere between, 12 and
It's not too graphic for somebody who's just gone into secondary school then.
no. I did keep it fairly low key on the graphics. There's one battle scene, but nothing too graphic there. So I think it could be suitable for younger teenagers.
So with this being your debut novel, I find a lot of authors like myself write short stories. Have you written short stories in the past, or has it all just been this novel?
Mainly I focus on longer pieces, but I am part of a writing group as well.
Oh, okay.
And for practice, we do a lot of flash fiction, so 100 to 300 word stories.
And bounce ideas off each other.
Exactly. And actually part of the group, we self-published an anthology of our stories a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we're in the process of doing another one at the moment. So I've had a bit of experience with those kind of short stories.
So you're doing it all through, I don't know, Zoom or something like that? Are you like we do it now, or
yes,
or FaceTime or whatever?
Yes, for a year now we've moved to Zoom, all electronic.
Were you in the writers group before the lockdown?
Yeah, so the group itself has been going on for about 5 or 6 years now, and we used to meet. Yeah, we used to meet in person, and then we had to move on to Zoom recently.
Did you meet in like in the local library or a pub or something, or?
It was part of the library, but not the library itself. So the local library put on an event with an authors panel.
Yeah.
And we just happened to be in the audience, and someone said, is there a writing group locally? And no one could think of one offhand. So we said, okay, let's make one. And that's
good. That's
how we started.
So you obviously get your ideas from you there and everywhere. Is there a particular place you like to write?
Not really. I do most of my writing, at home on my computer, but I as you say, I do take inspiration from around me. So when I'm out and about, and if I have any ideas, I'll just jot them down on my phone or a notebook or something. But mainly I just do my writing at home. So,
and like you said, you've got launched basically. I mean, when we got new books coming out, we'd love to do a live event somewhere. So if you could have maybe the pandemic hadn't happened then, would you have maybe tried to launch it somewhere, or would you like a festival, or would you?
I'd probably start something a bit lower key, like in a bookshop or a library.
Yeah.
I used to work in a library, so I feel a bit at home in a library, so that probably would have been my first choice.
Well, I've got the Gamer with Crystal Peake, and I've got a couple of other books coming out. And the first thing I'm going to be doing when things start to relax a little bit is maybe do a library tour.
It's a good idea.
And tour the country that way. It's a good way to meet people.
Yes.
Like-minded people who enjoy reading as well. So you've been writing a few years now, then, really. What are you working on at the moment? Have you got anything on the go that you in the middle of? Or?
Well, Air Fay actually is it's the first in a series, so I'm working on the next, the second book, which is set in fire. So each in the world that my book is set in, there's 4 kingdoms, each one for each of the elements. So I've now moved on to fire for the second one. And I've got a couple of other ideas that are just, spinning around.
If you don't mind me asking, then how do you plan the novel itself when you're starting off? Because I've got a friend of mine who does one of these. Do you know the series NCIS, where they've got the big screen and they got all the strings and all that? What's your process of actually starting a story off then?
For the first book, I didn't actually have a plan, so I just, one day sat down and wrote. And then I decided for the next book and any other books that I write to try and actually plan it out. So I've got a rough skeleton timeline, as it were,
Yeah.
for the second one, and I'm trying to keep to that, but obviously writing changes the story as it goes along. For the moment, I've mostly kept to that original timeline that I've set out.
So you've got a criteria that you work to, but when I'm writing something and I'm kind of rolling along, I'm a bit unorthodox. I don't know where I'm going. Do you know what the end of the story is before you get there, or?
For the second book, I have an idea of where I want it to end up, and I
Yeah.
hope to end up there, but we'll see, as you say, as it goes along.
You're a lot more organized than I am then. So if you're halfway through writing a book then,
Yeah.
and would you think, oh wow, like a different character would be good to you? Would you kind of build a character up that wasn't originally in there?
I haven't yet, but it is possible. I had a similar situation, not quite that, but I had started writing a new character in the second book, and I was writing and it just didn't feel right, and I couldn't figure out why there was a block there, and I realized that I'd completely written the character wrong, so I had to go back and change everything about that character, and then it seemed to work better.
So you got to a blip in the story that you couldn't get around or over, and you thought, well, maybe another character would fit in there, and that would make the story flow along and run a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, one of the big problems that I get when I'm writing something is if I've got a group of characters of about 6 or 8 characters, I always forget what color their eyes are, or their hair, or what color skin they got. How do you work on that? Do you have notes and things that you can go reference, or you look like an organized kind of person to me?
Yes, I tried that. So when I was writing the first one and I was developing the world and the characters, I did kind of plan the other characters as well at the same time.
Yeah.
So I've got a rough idea of what they are, but I haven't made note of the specifics of the new characters, to be honest.
There's a well-established author. He's a world-renowned crime fiction writer, and I still find it comical now because this author has written, I don't know, 30 novels maybe. I wouldn't say what his name is, but whenever he sends his manuscript to the editor, they've always got to correct the colors of the eyes and the hairs, because he always forgets which character, what color the hair and eyes and skin, and the shape of their hair. So it is difficult to keep track, especially if you write novel after novel. You can get lost in your own story, can't you?
But one good thing about books is that the reader can imagine the character however they want.
I suppose,
So
yeah.
Maybe being too prescriptive of what your character looks like would actually impede the reader's imagination.
Well, I suppose if you let the reader imagine from themselves, and you just put kind of an outline of the character, they can picture what the character looks like, can't they?
Exactly.
Yes, brilliant. I don't know, a seasoned author, or some people say an old dog. So I've been doing this for quite a few years, but it's great talking to authors who just got on the scene with a debut novel, because you've got fresh ideas, you've got different directions where you were going, and I miss the fact that we can all sit down around a table somewhere, like your readers group then.
Yes.
And discuss what you're on, and you could be stuck on something and somebody else could have an idea to help you get through it.
That's true. So when I was first writing my book, I was trying to write it by myself. I hadn't actually told anyone at all.
Yeah.
And I was struggling a bit. And then I told someone, and when I actually vocalized what I was doing and even just explaining the story, helped me create more and think about things better. And it was maybe even like simple questions to explain the world got
Yeah.
me elaborating the world more and creating
Well,
more.
when you've got say 2 or 3 characters having a conversation in your story, this might sound a bit weird coming from another author, but can you hear their voices in your head? Do they sound like? The reason I'm saying that is if I kind of use film stars' voices. So if I've got something like a wily old wizard, then I'll think of Patrick Stewart, who is in Star Trek Next Generation, or the guy who plays Gandalf out of the Lord of the Rings. I can't think of his name is at the moment.
Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen. I've got their voices in my head, so I can picture what the conversation would look like.
That's interesting. I don't actually, I can't think that my characters actually have voices, but they've got, I mean, I can hear them talking when I'm writing, but I can't actually describe what their voices are like.
It's just the way I write. I suppose we all write in different ways. So
Wow.
so thank you very much for talking with me. I think
Thank you very much.
I'm hoping that I pronounce your name correctly. Is it Virginie?
Yes, so Virginie is correct.
What's your surname? Because I didn't.
So for the book, I've used my Thai name actually, which is Pairaya, but my actual real person name is my surname is Python.
Do you know what? I was afraid I was going to say Python or Python, and they both sounded wrong. So Virginie Python is great. In fact, I love that name actually. I could have used that as a pen name later on for another book. So you've written short stories. That's you were. So
Yeah.
I'll ask about you first, because your accent, I don't know if I'm completely right. You sound American.
Yes, the accent tends to throw people off. So my dad is actually French and the name is French. So you weren't wrong actually with the pronunciation. In French, my surname would be Pisson.
Okay.
So yeah, you were correct actually. But in English, it's just easier to say Python. It's the same thing. And my mom is Thai.
Yeah.
And I'm actually originally from Bangkok, from Thailand. I lived and I grew up there. And so most of the English taught there ends up being with an American accent. So
you've got multicultures going on there then.
Yeah.
That's great, because there's all different traditions and everything to go with that as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you've written folklore, is it? Or is it?
Yes.
That's the
My
story you've written? So have you written a book then, or have you written short stories so far?
I've written a short story so far. So my short story is The Mermaid of Longka, which is featured in the Folklore book published by Peake. And I'm actually working on a full-length book still based on the same story, but at the moment it's just in short story form. Now I need to rewrite it as a novel-length story.
So what is Folklore all about then? What's the story, the base of the story?
So the anthology is looking at different folklores from lots of different traditions are actually, and retellings of them. And the one I chose was a Thai myth, actually. So going back to a part of my culture that I think outside of Thailand people don't know so much about. So it's a Thai kind of epic myth that has obviously the hero and the bad guy and a lot of demons and big epic battles, but amidst all of that there's a minor character that has quite a pivotal role in the story, but she kind of gets glossed over. It's like this woman makes a choice that influences the rest of the story and then she's never really heard from again. So I thought it would be nice to tell the story from her perspective. Is
it set in kind of present day, or is it?
No, so it's set in the way a lot of fantasy is set, in kind of like generic, not generic historical. I kind of had pictured a little bit 19th century as the inspiration, but a kind of not quite real historical setting.
Okay, so I've written a couple of notes because I'm getting to know all the authors of Crystal Peake, and I've got you down as kind of fantasy and historical.
Yes. So I like writing fantasy, but I try to base it a lot on history. So I'll research quite deeply what what people, with the time setting that I had as an inspiration, what people would have worn, what would have been the norm in terms of, you know, their day-to-day life, and then I'll add in just a little bit of the supernatural, so that it's not you wouldn't call it a pure historical fiction, but I like to bring it closer to historical fiction rather than entirely fictional fantasy.
You've got to have a little bit of supernatural in there just to spice it up a little bit, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But what I find, if I'm writing something that, because I wrote a book called Ghosted and I based it in my local area.
Yeah.
When you research and when you write in it, you've got to make sure that it's spot on, haven't you? Because people will find stuff in there and they will tell you about it if it's wrong.
Yeah. I think that's why I try to stay away from like a pure historical fiction, because then people really want it to be very, very accurate. Whereas if you've got a ghost in there and magic exists, then you're already a little bit not, you know, you're allowing more leeway, but still you want, and I did a lot of research still, because as you said, you want it to be, I think, first out of respect to, you know, if it's from somewhere you're from, just that you get it right. And yeah, to kind of avoid having too many people be like, oh, well, you got this detail wrong.
well, do you just write it purely from research, or do you add your own slant in there and you know, put a bit of fantasy and stuff that wouldn't normally have been in there?
I think I try to do a bit of both. I think the hard thing with fantasy is that it still needs to have a logic and there still needs to be rules.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you add to it, is you might base it on something that exists. So the magic that is in my short story is based on a real practice. So in Thailand, we're quite superstitious over there. Definitely believe in ghosts is a very normal part of life there, and you have witch doctors who have kind of their way of being, and it's actually not a world I'm that familiar with. I know it, but I'm not that involved in it, so I had to read up a lot about it. So I based it a little bit on that, but then you kind of have to decide in your world what is possible and what isn't, even with fantasy, right? And that's, I think, the bit that you add into it.
When I'm doing schools, when we get back to that, and I do primary school children's workshops, I try and tell them that even though we're writing in fantasy and sci-fi and supernatural, there's got to be a certain element of reality in there.
Yeah.
It's got to make sense.
Yeah.
You know, you can have flying carpets and you can have ghosts and you can have zombies and everything, but there's got to be a kind of a plot there, and people have got to identify with the characters and stuff as well. So it can't just go off in all different directions. You've got to have a goal where you set towards.
Yeah, and I think what you said about characters that people identify with, I think the characters have to feel real, and that's also where, I don't know for you, but for me, I try to bring my own thoughts and feelings or experiences, even if I've never been in that situation, trying to imagine how I would feel in that situation, because that's also what makes it believable. Even if there is a ghost and maybe magic is real, if the person feels real, then you're more likely to buy into the story.
So do you dig deep into the characters and the nuances and, you know, the way they feel and look and their emotions and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I find it very hard to write, actually. One of the things that is important for me is being able to hear the character's voice and how they would talk.
Yeah.
And you do still try to write, you know, even if you can't hear it, you try to write, but it never reads quite, it doesn't work for me when I read it back. I'm like, there's something missing here. And the thing missing is usually that I haven't dug deep enough yet into who this person actually is. I've just tried to fitted them into the plot instead of making the plot happen as a result of what they would do.
The interview I just did with Rosa, the question I asked her, because I said, when I'm writing and I put characters in there, in order for me to make it sound authentic, I can hear the characters, what they're saying, and I base them on film stars. So basically, I was telling Rosa that if I've got two, I don't know, sorcerers or two old kind of weathered guys having a conversation. And if there's a wizard or something involved, I'll always have Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart.
I gotta see that.
If I can hear their voices in my head, then when I'm actually writing the scene, I can picture them, even though the characters may not look like them, but it makes it easier for me to do it that way. Rosa said she doesn't actually hear the voices of her characters, but you've got to as well. Then have you? You've got.
Yeah, for me, I have to hear.
You're doing it the same. Yeah.
Kind of how they would phrase something, or how they would, if we were both of us looking at the same scene, what are the things that we would notice, or what are the things we would comment on? Is it a bit sarcastic? Is it a bit more optimistic? That sort of thing I need to get a feeling for.
Yeah. I was doing a character the other day, and I was writing an adult short story or something, I think it was. And he didn't seem like the kind of character who would swear.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But the characters around him did.
Yeah.
He was kind of like a gentleman then, and it didn't feel right that he said the F word and I thought to myself, well, you were building the character up, and if you don't feel that he would swear, then don't put it in.
Yeah.
Because you've got to write exactly how you feel, haven't you? Well, what I'll ask you now as well then is, what are you writing at the moment? What have you got on the go?
So at the moment, I've actually had a lot of, and I think this year has been a bit crazy for everyone, but with work and then I've moved as well. So I haven't, if I'm completely honest, I haven't been writing very much fiction. In terms of myself, I always write a journal, but that project of turning the short story into a novel is still there. And for me, it's once things stabilize a bit more, I really want to get back to that. So just the more I think about it, I thought it would be a standalone novel. And now I'm like, actually, it's more like a duology, because there are kind of two parts to it. I think the problem with adapting an epic is that the more you go into it, the longer it seems to get.
You said that you've moved recently.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're writing a journal, you're still keeping in contact with your writing, aren't you? If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I wish that, because I used to write diaries when I was a kid, and I left that a long time ago. And I find celebrities now are bringing out memoirs and things, and they've got sets and sets of diaries they wrote years ago.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd done that now. Your journals would be the same thing, wouldn't they?
You know what? I used to write lots of diaries as a teenager, and then I stopped.
Yeah.
And I stopped for a good 10 years or so. And then a year or two back, I went through a bit of a down phase, and lots of kind of not so great changes in my life, but which obviously is always a catalyst for better things in the end.
Yeah.
But I was reading, okay, what can help? And a lot of the kind of mental health advice is, journaling is good. So I was like, well, you know what? It doesn't hurt to try and get back into this. And I actually have found it very helpful. So now I've just maintained it for the last 2 or 3 years.
Well, a lot of people, not just authors, it feels like therapeutic to write your feelings and stuff down, and look back over it and think, oh wow, that's how I felt at that time.
Yeah.
And it can be emotional as well, I suppose. I mean, like I said, I wish I'd actually kept up a diary and to look back on things that I'd done. What I find strange, and I don't know if you've ever come across this with your writing, is I'll pick up one of my books, maybe I wrote 10 years ago, and I look at certain passages and I think, wow, did I write that? Because it might have been a phase in my life where all these ideas come flying through, and it's kind of, you've channeled all your thoughts and your inspiration into that point, and it looked like it was written by somebody else. I thought, was I that good back then?
I have that moment as well. It's you see it with fresh eyes, and then you think, wow, like this is actually very, readable and engaging and very exciting. And I don't feel like I write like that now. What happened?
I mean, you actually evolve as a writer, as an author, and whatever you, I mean, the first book that I wrote was in 2004, which is like 17 years ago, something like that. Isn't it? I'm not up on my maths, but I'm a completely different writer to what I was back then, and I've experienced a lot.
Yeah.
Do you find that you evolve as a writer and your writing changes?
Definitely. I think what was, I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. Like you said, like you experience different things, and so I think the focus of your writing changes quite a bit as well.
Yeah.
So I think when I was younger, I used to write a lot very heavily inspired by whatever I was reading in that moment. So if I, obviously I think most teenagers growing up in the early 2000s read Harry Potter. So a lot of writing was then very, very inspired by that, and a lot wanting to recapture the feeling I had reading.
Yeah.
Now that I'm older and I've had some actual life experience, it's also about injecting some of what I've actually experienced into the writing, even if it's not in a direct way.
All right, okay. Well, I would say these days, where we've had a year of lockdown,
Yeah.
and I don't know how long it's going to go on for, but I think authors have changed in the way they write now, because a lot of people have been locked inside. It's like being a teenager and being grounded.
Yeah.
And I bet there'll be a lot of books that come out with lockdown themes in them.
Yeah.
There was I read somewhere the other day that a travel writer was he was going on a commissioned tour of a country to visit all the different forests and woods, and he couldn't go. All he had was his study, his window, and his little like stamp of a garden. So he had to research half of it on Google, because he likes to go out and about in the wilderness, and he couldn't do it. So he had to research it, which, like you said, a lot of authors now, there may be a lot of lockdown books out there. There'll definitely be a lot of books on viruses and vaccines and that kind of thing. And it's probably not what publishers will be looking for now.
I'm thinking there might be also quite a lot of stuff about, there's this kind of very quick video app called TikTok, and one of the trends on it now has been sea shanties. And
yeah.
It's a very bizarre thing to suddenly become very popular now, but then, we're thinking, well, they were kind of communal songs sung at a time when you're very isolated and
campfire kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of books are going to be very dark as well, because people, when in this time of, I mean, the news reports and everything are depressing, and it's gone on for a long time. So dark thoughts will come out, and they'll come out in different stories and novels as well, I would have thought. Because people, they've never been in this position before. I'm just one in a billion people, because it hasn't only just happened to you and me, it's happened to everybody in the world. We all just come to a stop, didn't we?
Yeah.
So you were still enjoying your writing. Are you getting back into your writing now, even though you've been moving? And
not so much my fiction writing now. I've maintained the journaling, but the fiction I think will be on hold for maybe at least another month, because I work in retail actually, so it's been a lot of very we're open one day and I'm kind of based in stores training the teams one day in store, and then we're back into lockdown. So it's very hard to find any kind of stability when every week is different.
When you've got stuff pulling at you in the background, it's very hard to focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
And everything's got to be socially distant. Everything's got to be with masks and things. There may come a time where we can just forget about all that and go back to the way we were.
I'd be really excited to see that day. But I actually have a question for you, because we were talking about voices earlier.
I always get frightened when people got questions for me.
I think it's a good question. Or at least I hope so. It was about, you said that you pictured like Ian McKellen and gosh, why is this
Patrick Stewart, yeah.
Patrick Stewart? What for you was like the hardest character to find the voice of, and how did you end up finding that character's voice?
It's hard for me to think because I mean, when you've been doing it as long as I've, because I've got like books. I'm in my study now, and I've got a ton of, because I haven't been doing book signings.
Yeah.
I've got a stack of books for the
It's like
signing.
a wall.
Yeah, I'm not bragging with that, because to be honest, I've worked hard to get to where I am with my books.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I think it might have been the Gamer.
Yeah.
When I was writing the Gamer originally, I couldn't get the character quite right in the beginning, and when you work, because I work in such a way that I picture the character and the voice of the character, it wasn't coming through to me.
Yeah.
So I think that book actually took me 5 years. Normally I can write a book in about 6 months to a year.
Mm.
That one, I wrote it, it didn't work. I couldn't get the voice in my head. I couldn't get what the character was doing. I'd put it back in the virtual drawer on my, obviously on my laptop, on my files. And then I'd leave it a while, because advice given to authors, especially to me, when I first started out, was if you can't work on it and it's not working for you, put it away and bring it back out later on, and you'll have a fresh approach. You'll have fresh ideas. So I think the Gamer, which originally was called Death Trap, because he's playing on a console called Death Trap.
Yeah.
It just wasn't working. I put it away. I did a bit more. I put it away, and until in the end one day, oh yeah, it does sound like that person. I don't know why I actually pick a person. How do other authors work? Do you? I know that you hear the voices. Do you hear particular voices or ones you've invented?
I think they're ones I've invented, but I have to
Be careful.
I'm trying to think. I don't necessarily think of like an actor or someone I know.
Yeah.
But I have to hear, yeah, like I have to be able to imagine what it would be like to be in their head. And, you know, if they go for like I don't know, if they go to like brunch at a place, like what would be their comments? What would be, you know, is it more sincere? Is it more sarcastic? That's kind of how I hear the voice.
Yeah.
Is what is it that they focus on, and what is it that they, you know, do they use humor to deflect, or are they more, so I don't hear a specific person's voice, but I have to hear that. And you mentioned earlier as well, there's some characters that I'll write and I'll put in a swear word because that's how I, you know.
Yeah, that's what you think.
You realize, you read it and you're just like, that just sounds wrong. Like they wouldn't say that.
The thing is, I was brought up, my dad died many years ago. My mum is still alive, and I've never sworn in front of my mother. And it's disrespectful to think about swearing in front of her. So I think that's come out of my writing actually. And I think, well, that character wouldn't say that at that time. It doesn't suit the character to do so. But the thing with the characters' voices, I think, is because we've had big actors like Robin Williams. He's got a very distinctive voice.
Yes.
From where I live in South Wales, you've got Richard Burton and you've got Anthony Hopkins. So if I'm ever on a bus or if I'm in a pub somewhere or a library and I pick up on a conversation that I can use in a story, then once the people have gone away, in order to remember what they sounded like, I use film stars' names. It's very sad, I know.
I don't think it is at all. I think, you know, we all have our thing that helps. And I think for me, the voice is the thing I need to hear first, but then I also try to picture like, oh, well, what would they wear? Like what, you know, if they had a uniform, what would it look like? And so I like to draw as well, and I'll try and draw them out. And sometimes I'll draw them and it looks wrong as well.
Yeah.
I'll be like,
That's one thing I wish I could do. If I could draw exactly what the characters look like, I could picture the story more vividly.
Yeah.
I always think of, when I bring this up in a conversation with somebody, I always bring up Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
I know he's not an author, but he can do the lyrics. He can play the music to it. He can sing it the way he wants to sing it, so that the song is exactly as he wanted it. If I could draw, like I said, my best friend is an artist and he's done some of the work behind me. I could actually picture the scenes exactly. I've tried to draw in the past, but if I drew a horse for you now, it'd look like a big rat. That's how bad my drawing is. But yeah, I think I'm going to slowly wrap it up there now, because we've got one more, I think, author to talk to. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yes, me too. It was lovely meeting you.
Yeah, happy World Book Day, and I'll bring Anushka back in now, and we'll finish off.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah. Oh, I've got a question. What's your favorite book or film about being a writer?
Me?
Oh, for both of you.
Oh, what's my favorite book or film about being a writer? About a writer in a film?
Yeah, well, one where the character is a writer.
Do you know? There's two films that actually stand out for me. As Good as It Gets, Jack Nicholson. He's a novelist in there. But my favorite one is Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell.
Oh, I love that one.
Because as he's walking through the story, so he's actually, the story's been it's been written as he's actually acting it, and it's been written at the same time. Who's the actress who's actually writing?
Emma Thompson.
Emma Thompson. She's standing on a table or something, having a cigarette, and she's trying to think, because she's going to kill him, isn't she?
Yeah, I love the bit where she's in the A&E of a hospital.
Yeah.
And she goes up to a nurse and says, "Okay, well, these people are going to make it. Where are the people who are really dying?"
And that film stands out for me. I love Stranger Than Fiction. I've watched it quite a few times, because I love the idea that the story is going along in real time, and it's been, and you can hear the voice. I don't know if you can hear Patrick Stewart. But
I can picture that voice.
What about you then?
So I was trying to think, because I was like, what books or films have I read or seen about writers? And I'm struggling to think of any on the spot, but the thing that did come to me, actually Welsh writer as well. So Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite books by Diana Wynne-Jones. And it's not about a writer, but the main character is, so it's a fantasy novel. She has a great sense of humor, and the main character is Sophie Hatter, and she has these magical abilities, but she's not actually aware of them.
Yeah.
And the way her magic kind of expresses itself is like she talks life into things.
Yeah.
So she's, at the beginning of the novel, she's a hatter, she makes hats, and she'll be like, "Oh, I bet you'll get married within a year." And then the lady who buys that hat does get married in the year.
Oh, wow.
I like this idea that she's not writing, but she's talking and using words, and by using her words, she brings things to life, and that's,
she's crafting the way the story goes. Oh, I like that, actually.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I haven't read the book, but I've seen the film. And actually, the other, apart from Stranger Than Fiction, the film I was going to bring up was another Ghibli film. It's Whisper of the Heart. That's a lovely one. It's about this this teenage girl who is considering becoming a writer, and it sort of then shows like how her real life inspirations end up being in the book, and it shows like her lack of self-confidence, and so yeah, that's a very good one.
My battery's running low, so I'm putting my charger in at the moment. So.
But yeah, I would definitely recommend the book. It's very different from the film. Like I love the film as well, but it's funny. It's definitely the same story being told through two very different types of creatives.
Yeah, I think
the film is very like.
Yeah, I think it's probably because of how Miyazaki makes films. Like he like just starts with the drawings and the story comes later. I actually mentioned it earlier when Colin was talking about going into schools, and I was saying that apparently the title came to her. A child literally said when she went into a school, "You should write a book called The Moving Castle."
And she was like, right, getting on that. But it's very funny. Like it's a book that it's like a good comfort read for me because it doesn't take very long, and I usually find it very funny. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely
Lovely to
gonna
meet
have to
you,
read that.
Lily.
Lovely to meet you too. Happy World
Lovely to
Book
meet you.
Day.
Happy World Book Day.
I'll just sign off then, and then the next.
Hi, my name's Alice Austin. I'm the author of Sealskin, which is the first story in Folklore, a Dark Anthology. So I live in Kent. I live with my boyfriend and an absolute terror of a ginger cat. So about Sealskin, it's the story of a girl called Sarah, whose evil, abusive father enlists the help of a Selkie, which he hopes can take them on a journey so that he can cure his daughter's disability and hopefully marry her off to someone rich so he can get all the money. So throughout the journey, Sarah really gets close with the Selkie. They develop quite a strong bond, and she learns some stuff about herself and her family, and she learns that the Selkie might be able to help her escape her terrible father. So that's the first story in the anthology. There's quite a few more, as you would expect from an anthology. There's a real mix. Some of them are quite heartwarming and nice. Some of them are actually really scary. And there's also a real mix of well-known folklore, like Rumpelstiltskin, The Little Mermaid. And then there's some stuff I've never heard of before, like the Moddhey Dhoo, a couple of other things. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, you should definitely check it out. So on to the other projects I'm working on. I'm sure a lot of authors will sympathise with me when I say that I have way too many projects that I'm trying to do all at once. I've got quite a mix as well. Some of them are horror, some of them are fantasy, and there's even a little bit of sci-fi. And the sci-fi is actually what I'm working on at the moment. So it's something I wrote for NaNoWriMo 2020. If you haven't heard of NaNoWriMo, it's basically a challenge to try and write a whole novel within a month, usually in November, but you can do it at any time of the year. So it's 50,000 words and you've got to try and complete it in a month, which I did manage for this one. So this is about someone who has real problems with self-loathing. She ends up trapped on a spaceship with 8 parallel universe versions of herself. So as you can imagine, that does not go down well. I've been having quite a lot of fun writing it, but the more I work on it, the more I realise that it's something that's going to be quite difficult to turn into something that people want to read, if that makes sense. So it's actually quite a challenge to write it, but I am really enjoying myself, so that's the important thing. I'm quite early on in the process at the moment, so I've just written the first draft and I'm just going through the first round of edits on that, so that's still got quite a while to go. Something else I'm working on is a horror novel. So this one's about someone who starts dreaming about a strange world filled with monsters. I don't want to give too much away, but as time goes on, she starts noticing things from that world kind of spilling over to the real world. And she also notices some odd things going on with her own body. So there's a fair bit of gruesome body horror in it, and just a whole kind of weird and wonderful dream world to explore. So I'm quite excited about this one because I think it's almost there. I think it just needs a little bit more editing before I'm ready to look at publishing, so that's quite exciting. So the third thing I'm working on, I know there's quite a few things. This is a funny fantasy story which is probably going to end up being split into 2 books because it's quite long, there's quite a lot there. So it's kind of a parody in a way. So there's the basic cliche that everyone's heard of, the prophecy, the chosen one will fight the Dark Lord and decide the fate of the world. But in this story, it turns out the prophecy was wrong. There are 8 Dark Lords, they team up and easily kill the chosen one. And then her bratty teenage son. It's his job to save the world, effectively. He swears to avenge her death and just makes it his life's mission to hunt down the 8 Dark Lords and kill them. He can't sword fight, he can't use magic, and at the beginning he's just a bit useless. So he's probably one of my favourite main characters that I've written, just because he is so inept to start off with. So I've got a fair bit of work to do with this story. I've finished the first draft of the first book and I'm partway through the first draft of the second book, but obviously still got a lot of editing and a lot of writing to do on that one. So that's it for all the big projects that I'm working on. But then I'm always kind of coming up with short stories and flash fiction. I'm quite fond of them because they're just something you can write and then it's done, and then yeah, it's quite quick and easy to finish. So I've got a bit of an idea that maybe I'll do an anthology sometime. I've got lots of short little horror stories involving monsters. So some examples are a pair of giant bugs who seem to have adopted this human. Someone who's beginning to suspect their hair is actually alive. And a beastly ex-girlfriend. So take what you will from that. So yeah, I've just got a lot of little short and not sweet, but short stories which I think might work well together. And I've got a few ideas of more short stories I can write. So yeah, an anthology full of monsters is probably the next thing that I will be working on in the future. But then again, I don't want to work too much on anything new until I've finished something to the point where I'm happy to publish it. Otherwise, they will just keep piling up and I will never get anything done. So yeah, that's about all I've got to say. I hope you have a great World Book Day. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Okay, I'm here with Katie Brignull, author of the Moddhey Dhoo from Folklore, a Dark Anthology. Okay, Katie, so what is the Moddhey Dhoo about?
So it's a really, really old folk tale from the Isle of Man, which is, lots of people haven't heard of it, but it's a tiny little island in the middle of the Irish Sea. So it's about a big spectral black dog, which are obviously quite common in many countries' folklores, but this one's specific to the Isle of Man, and it's said to haunt the ruins of Peake Castle. So yeah, I retold the story and then added my own little modern day twist onto it to kind of bring it into the 21st century.
Yeah, the Isle of Man, I know it's a beautiful place. It's often used for like films and TV shows. If they need some sort of beautiful British village or beautiful fantasy village, it's usually the Isle of Man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's for such a tiny little island, it's really beautiful. It's got some amazing landscapes, some really beautiful scenery.
Yeah, so if any of you watching are wondering what the Isle of Man looks like, you've probably already seen it.
Probably, yeah. I think it was it featured in an Alice in Wonderland film many years ago. I can't remember which one exactly, but there was also, was it Saving Ned or something, the man who won the lottery? That was filmed on the Isle of Man. So yeah, you probably have seen it just without realising.
And of course, as the famous motorbike race there, the TT races.
That's right, yeah, every June.
Did you do any research when you were developing this story?
Not a huge amount of research as such, because I was so familiar with the tale anyway. It was a story that I'd heard a lot growing up, because my dad grew up on the Isle of Man and my grandparents both lived there until they passed away. My auntie still lives there, in fact. So it was just one of those stories that was handed down to me and I heard a lot growing up. So like I said, I kept the main bones of the story quite true to the original because it's such a great story. But then I just wanted to add a bit of a modern twist onto it, because so often we think that folklores are so long ago and they're not really real, and they can't possibly happen now. But that's why I wanted to just add some extra detail onto the end to make you think, well, actually, maybe they do still happen now.
Brilliant. Okay, and what were your influences in terms of writing the short story?
I think I just like that kind of story, really. I like stories that are a little bit spooky or a little bit fantastical. So when I saw the competition that Crystal Peak posted, I thought, oh, do you know, I've got the perfect folklore that I could retell for that. I find myself more drawn to that kind of storytelling rather than more real life kind of stuff, I think.
So are you working on anything at the moment?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of things at the moment, actually. I'm working on my first novel, which I'm hoping to have finished in the next couple of months, if all goes well. It's taken a bit of a backseat recently with work and everything else that's going on in the world, remote learning for my daughter and stuff. So, you know, it's kind of been sidetracked a little bit, but I'm hoping to get that finished soon so I can get it edited and hopefully then actually get it out in the world. I'm also working on a collaboration with a very talented illustrator, but hopefully I'll have more to say about that soon.
Fantastic. So are those fantasy as well, or?
The novel is fantasy, yeah. I was kind of aiming for high fantasy, but I think it will probably end up being marketed as young adult, which is fine. So yeah, it's very, very fantastical. There's magic and there's mystical creatures and all that kind of stuff, which probably isn't up everyone's street, but it's exactly the kind of thing I like, which is why I decided to write it. They say write what you know, don't they? And I love that kind of stuff. The other project I'm working on is actually a collection of short stories for children, so there may be an element of fantasy in there. It's still in its very early stages though, so that remains to be seen.
Fantastic. And what's your influences for those two projects?
The novel, just because I love fantasy, and I've spoken about it a lot in previous videos I've done, and I'm quite vocal about how I'm a bit of a fantasy fan. So Tolkien obviously is a huge influence for me. I just think his, you know, in an ideal world, I'd be able to build worlds like he does, but realistically, I don't think there's many people that really can do that. So he's definitely an influence there. But yeah, I'm not a patch on him, unfortunately. The children's stories, probably because I have a daughter, so and up until last year I worked in a school setting, so I like kids' stories. I like reading to children, and I think it's something we should do more of if possible. So.
Does your daughter ever give you any feedback on your writing?
She does, yeah. She's my biggest fan, bless her. I don't know if that's just because she feels she has to be, or if she really likes it. But yeah, she's brilliant. I mean, to be honest, she's almost better at writing than I am now. She's obviously, I've been lucky enough to see a lot of her work over these lockdowns, and her poetry in particular is absolutely outstanding. So I'm really excited to see what she can do as she gets older, actually.
Yeah, it is surprising, you know, especially kids who read a lot, you know, they have such a wide vocabulary, and yeah, sometimes you think, oh, they have a wide vocabulary than me, so that I don't know those words. I'm just not using them.
Yeah. No, she's one to watch in the future, I think, definitely.
Sounds fantastic. So with your children's stories at the moment, do you find that you're writing them for your daughter, or
probably not, actually, because she's quite advanced with her reading. I think she's reading a lot of stuff that older children would read, and I think what I'm writing is probably aimed at younger children, so kind of around the, I don't know, between 5 and 10, depending on their ability, but definitely aimed at primary children rather than secondary school children.
An interesting question I asked a couple of the other authors during interviews on here is, do you have a favourite film or book about a writer, either a real writer or a fictional writer?
Favourite film about a writer? Oh, no, I haven't really watched any, I don't think. I was initially incredibly excited when I heard they were creating a film about Tolkien. However, I will now refuse to watch it because I heard a lot of talk about how they spoke about how his writing was influenced by the wars and by everything that was going on in the world at the time. And I know for a fact that he would have hated that. He didn't want that. He hated that kind of thing and actually wanted his writing to be taken for what it was, and that was a story and creativity. And yes, I know it's kind of been pushed aside by his estate as well, so I won't watch it now on principle, which is a shame because I'd love to learn more about him.
Yeah.
But I don't think that'd necessarily be what he wanted. Sorry, I'm a bit of a diehard Tolkien fan.
Yeah, I think there is an interesting debate, really, with novelists or sometimes even songwriters. To what extent can we see the influence what happened in their lives on their work, and also to what extent that it's fair. And sometimes it's overanalyzed, and sometimes when it's adapted for film, that those connections to what happened in their real life are sort of oversimplified.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll very quickly go through them now because I talked about them earlier in the video. But three I recommend are Whisper of the Heart, The Man Who Invented Christmas, and Stranger Than Fiction. There's three really good films. So yeah, if you want to find out more about them, I talk about them in the video.
Okay, lovely.
What are you researching for books that you're writing at the moment?
Not a lot of research, to be honest. I think that's the joy with fantasy, is it can be whatever you want it to be, really. I think maybe that's why I like it. I don't have to stick to rigid rules and I can just pretty much make it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think as far, the furthest I've been with researching is kind of thinking about more appropriate clothing or weaponry that may have been used in an age further away than where we are now, because unfortunately it's one of those fantasy novels where it isn't based in the modern world. I'm not one of these progressive writers. I like the old tropes and I know they've been done to death, but that's what I enjoy writing, so that's what I'm writing.
Yeah. Well, sometimes those can be fun to work with because then you can subvert them, or even subvert the expectation of subverting them at all.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's all about, I don't think there's any such thing as a completely unique story anymore, is there? It's all about how you put your own spin on things. So if you can do that well, then brilliant. I suppose you just have to try and make it not sound like all of the others.
What's advice to have for anyone interested in writing? Read
lots. Read widely and enjoy it. If don't waste time on books you're not enjoying. Don't feel like you have to read something just because it comes highly recommended, or you think you should read it, because it won't get you anywhere. Read as much as you can, as long as you're enjoying it, because like we said earlier, that will build your vocabulary. It will expose you to different storytelling, different ways to tell stories. If you don't read, you're going to struggle, I think.
Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've heard from another writer about either writing or getting published?
Again, I think it's just the old, the cliches, really. Just be true to yourself. Write what you want to write, not what you think people want to read. Make time to write, something which I'm really bad at the moment, I know, because I'm like you, I've got so much going on. But yeah, if you don't make time to write, you're not going to get anything written. I know that sounds obvious, but even if you write something rubbish, you've got it down, you can edit it later. So you can wait forever, and I've been guilty of this in the past. You can wait forever trying to find inspiration, but it might never come. So just write. It's, I hear a lot of people say that, and I think it's true, and it's certainly given me the push I need in the past.
Yeah. I think my favorite bit of advice is from Anthony Horowitz, who I saw do at a talk once when I was 14, I think. And it was, publishers are idiots. Look how many people turned down J.K. Rowling.
True.
So all publishers are idiots, except Kevin and Nicola at Crystal Peak. They're really good.
Oh, they are wonderful, and it's been fantastic
brilliant.
working with them. They are really good, and it's actually been really nice because obviously this is the only story I've had published so far. But you know, my expectations were, you know, very different to what they have been, and you know, keeping in touch and keeping a kind of social side going even after the book's been released, and being in touch with the other authors, it's been lovely. So yes, Crystal Peak are great. Well, that's it. I think with a publisher like Crystal Peak, you get the more personal experience, don't you, rather than just being another cog in the machine. It's good for that.
I have another question. Only talking about your novel that you're writing at the moment. Are you doing much preparation for that in terms of world building or structure, or are you just seeing where it goes as you write?
Well, I had a very kind of set idea of what I wanted to happen in the story. I'm a mix of a planner and a pantser, really. I knew exactly what I wanted to happen. I knew the outline of the story. I knew the characters. I knew the plot twists, but I decided to let a lot of the more detailed world building come through during the writing, because I thought, I know what I'm like. I'll overplan and I'll never get it done. So a lot of it has just come as I've written it. And actually, there's been a couple of quite big plot twists in it, which I wasn't expecting. They just happened. They kind of fell out of me onto the laptop as I was writing. So yeah, I think that's a good way to do it, to try and mix the planning and seeing what happens as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you write it chronologically, or do you do one chapter and do one chapter here, one chapter there, or somewhere in between?
Oh no, have to do it chronologically. My brain couldn't cope with having bits here and there. I like to start and I like to go through and finish. So for this one, things might change in the future with other ones, but no, for this one, it needed to happen as it happened. Yeah, I've got notes, but I've not actually written large chunks of further down the line. Although hopefully I've not got much left to go. So we'll see.
So did you do your world building mostly before you started, or did you doing a lot whilst you're writing?
The important bits I did beforehand. So where the setting was and like the political side of it, the magical kind of fantasy side of it. But when it came to the more detailed things, like exactly how it looked, exactly what happened where, that came a bit more as I wrote it.
Yeah, which I think is a good way of doing it. Of course, you know, that means you're not exposition dumping bits of information that aren't useful. You're just revealing parts of the world building that are useful to the story and understanding the, you know, the socio-political context of the world you're creating.
Yeah.
And of course, you're discovering that at the same time, so it does make sure that everything is relevant.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like I said, with the parts of the story that just told themselves, they surprised me. But as they came out, I realised that actually that was exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know I needed it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the characters have to tell their own story to an extent, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of characters, did you do much preparation in terms of developing the characters, or has that changed while you've been writing?
I didn't actually plan all of my characters. I planned my main character in a lot of detail, and I planned 2-3 secondary characters. The rest of them again just presented themselves to me as and when I needed them, really. So yeah, for some of them I had really detailed plans, but then the others I didn't know who they were until they turned up. So
Yeah, I suppose, you know, you so you just kind of introduce new characters and you're like, wait a minute, I need someone to come in here. I need someone to, you know, help fill a function in the plot.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
And what's it been like sort of creating names for these characters?
Again, the great thing about fantasy is you can just make them up. So they're not real names, because I think I'd find that quite hard, because I think I know so many names. I'd always associate a name with someone I knew in real life.
Yeah.
But no, that they've literally just come to me and I've made them up. So some people might think they're absolute nonsense, and they'd be right.
Brilliant. Yeah.